Talking with the experts.
In some cases, the business as well, bringing in law enforcement, depending on the scale of the fraud. A lot of certainly public sector, or for instance, like oil and gas, who are linked to, if like the I suppose the national not the public sector, but the public sector business, if you're entity, they I've seen in those situations they've passed it on to law enforcement, and they've had strong convictions. But in business, generally speaking, that's not the case, because they actually don't need to. However, they have, in the majority of cases, introduced a very strong response. I've certainly seen it where, for instance, it wasn't a specific case, but through the training, because one of the things when we talk about with particular clients is actually in the training we discuss a particular project, or we walk through their own controls, finance, procurement, quality assurance, or projects.
Talking with the experts.
Hello and welcome to Talking with the Experts. My name is Rose Davidson from rosedavidson.com, and Talking with the Experts is about all things business by business owners for business owners, and you can find it on all good podcasting streaming platforms and on YouTube. And today it's my special pleasure to introduce you to Stephen Tosh. Now, Steve has over 20 years experience within the field of procurement, fraud and corruption investigation and risk mitigation. He has headed many high-value and complex global investigations and currently works with global clients in the design and implementation of frameworks and risk approach to prevent corruption and fraud within supply chains. He has been involved in the development of national standards on procurement fraud and was the lead author in the draft of British Standard BS 10501 guidance on implementing procurement fraud controls. He designs and provides training courses across the globe in these areas of expertise, and has recently launched the Anti-Corruption Education Network to build a global anti-corruption community, share knowledge and mentor professionals working within the anti-corruption space. Welcome, Steve, and thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure, Rose. I'm delighted to be here.
Good. So tell me, how can people prevent corruption within their businesses?
Well, that's a very broad statement, really. But for me, the key element to prevention is the design of a framework. For instance, in the public sector, you'll have key elements like investigation. You may have an intelligence capability, so collecting information or prevention. But what there is a disconnect between these entities, or these parts of the organization. And this is where you have the insider threat can easily, in many cases, move about an organization. They can see where the control failures are within an organization and target it without being identified. I mean, it is common. Certainly, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners identified that in around 5% of cases, fraud isn't identified for over 5 years. So, and a lot of that is purely down to how we design out fraud and corruption, how we look at our own organisation and look at the control, particularly around risk assessment. Many, even nationally, organisations don't assess their risk or don't do it adequately. And it's the risk assessment that allows you to design out the fraud or the corruption, because it allows you to see where your key risk areas are, and done regularly. So that's, for me, that's the key element for it.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of organisations think, oh, it won't happen to me.
Yeah, sure. No, absolutely. And
that's probably why they don't do
there are many global examples out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's afterwards, when they've been hit, particularly larger ones where there is millions, if not billions of dollars worth of fraud or corruption, then they introduce the capability around that, because they've been hit hard, and in more than one country. We've seen many examples, and I won't go into details about particular companies, but it's only then that they introduce compliance programs or they have monitoring in place because they're looked at by government because of their failures. So if they introduced a much lower cost, a capability around this, then they protect reputation, they protect their ultimately their own revenues, and it is ultimate percentage of the losses that they have. So it is, for me, it's a no-brainer in many respects.
So I guess what we're talking about is like financial fraud, like stealing away from people. What about, goods? Is that included in it, or are you just doing
procurement fraud? Yeah. I mean, I map out procurement fraud, and there's 5 key elements to it. You have your completely insider threat, which is it's like you said, it's really just theft of an organization's assets. And creating false invoices or paper documentation around that to steal. Now, that can be a one-off thing like a computer, or it can be organized. And I've seen many occasions where it has been organized. Asset management is a key area in many organizations that isn't looked at for fraud risk. They look at the upfront part, like the banking sector is a prime example. They'll look at their own upfront solutions that provide for their clients or the members of the public for their accounts and their various solutions. They'll look at the bribery and fraud risk there, but they actually don't look at the back office and the back door, and that's where the theft and the fraud is happening, because there isn't the same control measures in place. So that's that's the insider threat, and then you have the fraud and corruption, where the insider helps the contractor to facilitate contracts and manipulate the process, and that is, I suppose, is the most common, and there are many aspects in relation to that, but certainly manipulation of the tender process is just one of many. And then you have the external threat, either an individual company submitting false invoices, or you have a collusion of companies. Bid rigging is one of the sort of global examples, where companies collude together, one to inflate the price, but also to ensure a particular company wins the contract or be a subcontractor. And the final one, the 5th area that I talk about, is the external threat, where individuals, either through cyber or contacting the company directly, change their supplier bank account details to their own. So they basically submit a request to change their bank account details because the fraudster sees that a particular supplier is working for a company. They either copy because of hacking, they've got that into their emails, and they ask for a change of bank account details, and they change it to the criminal's details, and then the money's future payments are diverted. And we certainly saw that in a lot in COVID as well. We saw because organised criminals couldn't cross borders, they went into cyber, and what they did was they created fictitious websites. And because there's the global dash for PPE, the whole world was looking for it at any cost. They were buying stuff online, and they were buying from criminals. They either provided inferior products, or they didn't provide anything at all, and the money was paid and they were gone. And certainly there was thousands of examples of that. Certainly within the first 3 or 4 months, Interpol took down about 1,000 websites. So it's broad in nature. Procurement fraud doesn't do the criminality justice, because there are so many types that I talk about 23 types of procurement fraud and corruption.
Yeah, it's pretty sad when people take advantage of a situation that is like the pandemic. I think really it's pretty low.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, we've talked about it for about 9-10 years because there are, regardless of the pandemic, there are global challenges, because we've had similar types of Ebola in West Africa. You have the hurricanes. I mean, the Americans lose millions every year because of the hurricane season. You've had things going on in Japan with the tsunamis. So disaster management is there every year, and certainly the US set up a significant fraud capability because the first thing that happens in these situations is money's thrown at it and then aid's thrown at it. And the fraudsters know this because it's there all the time. So they will target it. For instance, I always refer to BP when we always had the oil disaster in the Gulf. They lost probably billions through fraud because of the false claims made against the company. But it was cheaper to pay the false claims than it was to investigate the crime.
Yeah.
So it's there. It's not new for COVID, but to me it's highlighted it more. And there's been a lot more global examples.
I know we had some devastating bushfires here. Was it last year or year before? And
yeah, sure, absolutely. Same thing.
A lot of people that were, just cheating people. It was just so awful, kicking people while they're down. I think it's just despicable. But anyway.
Oh, is it? Was that down?
Yeah, I know, but why?
No, but for me, and it's one of the reasons why we started the Anti-Corruption Education Network, it's really important that we bring together the community of ethics, integrity, and individuals that want to do something about it, and the continual learning and sharing expertise around these things, because it's not new. These things have always been there for many, many years, but it's the awareness of it, and for me, that's key.
Yeah, I agree. I think because we probably a lot more online the last year and a half or whatever, it's more people are more aware of that it's happening than it was before. So before it was sort of just something glossed over, but now that everyone's using the computers, it's just out there in the cyber world altogether. So I guess how can business owners mitigate, or put these plans into place so that they can be better protected from fraudulent transactions within their business?
The key element for me, one of the things, I come from a background of law enforcement, and I headed an intelligence capability for a couple of years. And one of the key pieces of learning for me, which I transferred into business, is risk assessment, is collecting information, your own information and external sources of data, to allow you to build a profile on risk, whether it's at an operational level, if you've got a particular case or investigation, but it also assists tactical and managerial decision making, and it also allows you to strategically plan, your 1, 3 or 5 year plan. So collecting your own data is key, because certainly when we review organizations, one of the things I see consistently is that organizations don't recognize which data sources they have and how they can be used to look at risk. You have your audit data, your investigation, you may even have an intelligence capability, but do we look at things like quality assurance? Do we look at human resources data? One of the things I see consistently is conflicts of interest, where individuals will set up their own company to defraud the company they work for. That is a regular thing. And the simple checks of checking your staff against suppliers, their company directors and the shareholders, that information is open source. We can check that. Or suppliers against suppliers, because one of the things we also see is suppliers will create a number of companies to give the appearance of competition, but in actual fact, it's the same company. But these things are there to be checked. They're not hidden. I mean, corruption by its very nature is hidden because of the relationships. But in many cases, it's there to be found. I have many examples of investigations where, like say, the individuals were either shareholders or as a bribe, they were given a shareholding in the company. But the information was there to be checked. So it could have been stopped before it started or at some point down the line, identified much earlier. So collecting information and then the risk assessment allows an organization then to look at what it's got in place. Once you have a risk assessment, you can see, is it in the supplier onboarding part of an organization? Do we check the finances of a company? Do we check when the company was set up? So was it set up a week ago, therefore set up really to commit fraud, potentially? Or do we look at the the tender process, or how we single source? Do we look at the data management? How do we proactively look at our own data because we teach about 70 exact methods of how we can look at data to detect fraud or potential fraud and corruption risk. So it's how we use that in a framework. One of the things that I do in a sort of 3-day training course is a day on the typologies, but a day on the framework of how we can introduce a structure in our organization. And many organizations have a structure, but it's not big enough. They may not have a compliance department, or where they have volumes of invoices, there's never a verification of whether they work or services were ever complete. And this is where the simple fraud can happen, because invoices are submitted, signed off, and and paid, but actually the work, the requirement was never there in the first place because it's a fictitious requirement, and the invoice was paid because it was never checked. But that's where individuals know the system, know the compliance system in place, and know how to get around it. So it's looking at the structure. For instance, asset management, if you like, is the end of the supply chain in many respects, the life cycle. And because that's not looked at, many organizations have significant losses. It could be in the millions annually. But do we look at the root cause? And that's the challenge for many organizations, is actually digging down into the root cause. They may have an audit and say, oh, we've got $1 million of losses, but what's the root cause? Has the asset been delivered? Was it lost in transit? Or is it just a theft? And that's what a lot of cases are just written off because they don't know, and they don't understand or have the expertise to have a look at it. But once they have a look at it, they can actually identify, I've certainly identified in many cases, there's actually a ring of individuals involved in the theft. You may have a delivery driver involved. It's either delivered to personal addresses or it's delivered to a company who resell it back into the organization. So it's like you've got a cycle of fraud going on there. So yeah, so the framework for me, the risk assessment and the framework, it was one of the things I learned from the British Standard. It was the first back in 2013 when I headed the working group, was that there is a framework of areas we can consider. Doesn't mean you have to do it. I mean, it depends on the size of the company. But with a large company with an international reach, particularly, what do we want to use to look at the risk, to introduce and certainly to consider these areas and the expertise, because it's there to be identified and stopped in the majority of cases.
Yeah, so I guess that the main point I guess in the whole thing is that they need to design the appropriate frameworks and strategies to stop all this corruption and fraud and stuff going. And this is obviously what your education network does. So what you teach, does that suit for any country, or is that just for
yes, it is. It's both public sector and private sector, or the charity sector, not for profit. The principle is the same, and my expertise is in procurement, fraud and corruption. So I look at the end-to-end of the supply chain and the procurement methodology in our organization. And generally speaking, I like to use a procurement expert because they understand, what works in our organization, what your best practice should look like, and when it's not happening, to drill down to see if there's a reason why it's not happening. Because I've seen many bad practices over the years where they've had an allegation of bribery, but we couldn't detect it because their practices were so bad. They didn't collect their own data. So individuals could commit fraud and corruption quite comfortably and couldn't be detected because the data wasn't, they had an idea who it was, but we couldn't collect the data to verify it. So having those simple systems in place is really important. It's really important for an organization.
So do you often get the the authorities involved in your investigations, or do you just do the investigation and give it to the business owner and then let them do the? Yes,
the decision is up to them. In some cases, the business as well, bringing in law enforcement, depending on the scale of the fraud. A lot of certainly public sector, or for instance, like oil and gas, who are linked to, if like I suppose the national not the public sector, but the public sector
Yeah.
business, if you're entity, I've seen in those situations they've passed it on to law enforcement, and they've had strong convictions. But in business, generally speaking, that's not the case because they actually don't need to. However, they have, in the majority of cases, introduced a very strong response. I've certainly seen it where, for instance, it wasn't a specific case, but through the training, because one of the things when we talk about with particular clients is actually in the training we discuss a particular project, or we walk through their own controls, finance, procurement, quality assurance, or projects, and because I don't need to be there. I'm passing on my expertise, and they can identify themselves because they've got strong leadership, procurement, finance, project managers. They recognise where the weaknesses are in their own control mechanisms or procedures, so they can introduce it themselves. So they have realised, for instance, they've introduced one organisation that didn't recognise that they used a lot of cash in their transactions, and in the human resources department because they had a lot of event management. So they didn't realise they had a significant bribery risk. So they introduced a data management department just to look at these transactions and other data within their organisation. I think they introduced about 8 or 10 people. And also on the compliance side as well, we've had individuals who whistleblew, but they didn't have a compliance department. So that individual is then at risk because he wanted to keep his identity secret. So things like that were introduced, whistleblower hotlines, compliance departments. So in many cases through our training, organisations identify where their control weaknesses are and look to make change, and it's common, or introduce a risk register. Certainly it was an oil and gas organisation through our training, because one of the things we like to do is to take a live project and walk individuals, the CEOs and the leadership and the project managers through the whole process of a particular project, particularly where they do it more than once if it's a repetition throughout the years. And they walk through individual stages and then they recognise the risks as they go along. So then they create their own risk register. So when they introduce the project, then they can look at these risk areas. And then they can, if there are new ones, then they just add it to their own risk register as they go along and build it. So it can be a really valuable tool just on the basic education around what are the typologies and where can you be targeted. And then they can then understand their own risks. It doesn't need me as a consultant to go in. I'm happy to go in and have a look at their organisation if they feel it. But in actual fact, generally speaking, they've got their own expertise, and I'm just giving them the tools to go in and look at their own organisation.
So this education network, is it online or in person, or can it be a bit?
It's online, yeah.
Self-paced, or what is it?
Yeah, it's called the AREN network, AREN. It's online, and what we've got is a number of global experts on the site. We've got a number of webinars and podcasts and a lot of training materials, and as well as risk assessment materials, and a number of groups that discuss things like the international standard on anti-bribery management systems and these key areas. And it's bringing on the expertise just to give guidance. If they've got a particular issue, then we can talk in privately in these groups if they want to, and it allows them access to individuals. Particularly we're talking around things like the anti-corruption commissions across the world. There's various levels of expertise and challenges. So to me, it's to bring these communities together, I think will be make a significant impact globally.
I think so too. So have you written a book on any of this?
I'm in the process, believe it or not. I've got because I'd written my book, and then I realised while I was writing the book that the training process that we had was, here's the typologies and here's the methods of how you can prevent fraud and corruption. But what I hadn't got in there was the outcomes that the organisation want to achieve. So basically, from taking the framework approach, I've created a 4-pillar and 16-step framework around what an organisation should look at and what it should introduce and the process of how it should introduce it. So I've basically had to rewrite, not rewrite, but move all the chapters about now. So I'm in the hopefully the final stages of finishing off the book. It's between 60 and 70,000 words at the moment. And once I've got that, that'll be published. And that, again, it will just sit alongside nicely with the network and the training and everything else. I think it'll be a really valuable tool.
Well, good luck with that, because it's probably something that's very needed at the moment, with people become more knowledgeable about anti-corruption and all that sort of thing.
Sure.
Steve, where can people find you if they want to get in touch?
Sure. Through our website, obviously, Global Risk Alliance is the main one. Again, we're on all the social media, particularly LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook. We have a number of groups. We've got one group on Facebook, and certainly our main procurement, fraud and corruption group on LinkedIn. So you can certainly access me directly through there as well.
Terrific. Any words of wisdom to business owners about how to avoid being defrauded? Defrauded. Thank you. Yes.
The key advice, is your own integrity, your own ethics. If you have that, you know what you want in an organisation. If you're not content that the organisation, if you recognise there's key risks and you don't know how to, you know what the solution should be, you may have a structure in place already, but you're not sure whether it's strong enough. Ask for advice. It's simple as that. Ask for advice from us or from any other sources, just to see what's missing. It's about, I suppose, self-knowledge. Really, is developing your own knowledge, or bringing in the expertise to say, this is where your potential risk is. Right, what can we do about it? This is how it is, and that's why we've considered the structure, the framework, and a strategic approach, and introduce what's, because you can never stop fraud and corruption, but you can prevent a lot of it. You can mitigate your risk and how you can reduce that. And I suppose that's the key things for business owners, because the reputational damage can be more than the loss. Your long-term reputation can be quite significant. So it's how can we be seen, at the very least, to mitigate these risks.
Yep, I agree. Absolutely. Yeah, I've never worked in an organisation that didn't either have a compliance department or a risk management framework of some type that you had to, fill in everything before it was even passed onto the manager for sign off. So yeah, it was. And we always think it was a bit silly, but it's a necessary.
It's the challenge is not making it too bureaucratic, and that's one of the challenges without people getting, because if people get upset with the process because it's delaying projects, then there's a greater chance that they'll avoid it. And that's the point. So you have to look at a process to make it efficient. Particularly, and COVID is a prime example, is the procurement process needed to be made more efficient, and it wasn't. It was just dropped, and that's where the fraud happened. So you need to be able to look at the not your own, not necessarily lean process, but to ensure that there's enough controls in place, enough monitoring that we can reduce the process, and particularly in anti-fraud. It shouldn't be complicated. It doesn't need to be complex for that reason alone, because people will avoid it. So make it simple, and build a culture. Because if people recognise, get your own staff involved, and this is something I always teach right from the start, is that to build culture is about communication and engagement, and on its various levels. But it's getting your own organisation, your own staff involved to drive your anti-corruption, your anti-fraud, or any culture, whether it's health and safety or just a culture of learning. Get your individuals involved to drive it. Then they're more likely, they'll identify, more likely to identify risk, but they're more eager to introduce and give feedback on what you're currently doing. Not just a case of a big hammer and here it is. That doesn't it's not conducive to having a strong anti-corruption environment. So
absolutely not. No. All right, Steve, thank you so much for your time today. And
my pleasure.
It's been very informational. Thank you.
Good. That's my point. I hope I've added something across that people can take note and make a difference.
Yep. Thanks.
My pleasure.
Talking with the experts.